Hi, welcome back, everybody. So as you can see, we are still having trouble with the Nearpod, so we're going to abandon that platform. I think every teacher in America has figured out how cool it is. So maybe we're having some problems with competition. So instead, I'm going to ask you to enter your response to the prompt into the chat, which is, what does your community need you to be in this moment? And I see some answers starting to come in. And I'm going to pause for another minute before introducing our next speaker. So aware, present, a calm leader to take actions, flexible, a partner, a helper, an ally, a listener, a teacher, a supermom, an agent of change, a positive role model, to build and nurture relationships, kind, informed, anti-racist, climate warrior, a resource. So they're going to keep coming in, and keep your eye on those, but in the interest of not running too far over today, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Kevin Wright with Marin County Parks and their public affairs liaison. Kevin was with us as a founding member of the One TAM Partnership, and he's here to speak with us today about radical collaboration. So thank you, Kevin.
Good morning, Janet. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. As Janet mentioned, I'm the Government Affairs Manager for Marin County Parks, and I'm going to bring up my presentation. I'll leave my screen on. I miss you all. It's unfortunate we can't meet in person. I look forward to opportunities to travel around the Bay Area and see you all in person at some point. And I really appreciated the number of values in that exercise, this great precursor to this presentation and what we're going to explore here in a minute. I do want to point out from the earlier speakers a few key points. We saw in Rosa's presentation a number of maps that showed the regionality or the large scale of climate change impacts. And we also heard from her the increased number of extreme events that will occur. And that really speaks to Angela and Liz's points about the need for more rapid collaboration, that government or any other institution can't do it alone. And so here we are faced with more rapidly, more quickly collaborating with organizational cultures and individual cultures that are different than our own potentially. I also really loved Jose's statement, we don't live single issue lives. And he also points out an opportunity, which is the complexity of the problems we're faced with, as well as the opportunities for creative and inclusive solutions. So with that today, what I'd like to explore with you is how we navigate cultures and differences to collaborate effectively towards shared outcomes. And in this presentation, I'm going to bring together a couple of different areas of my background. One is as a cultural competence trainer for the County of Marin, where I work with county staff on diversity, inclusion, equity, and some of that will be woven into today's conversation. And two, as a collaborative leadership practitioner, where I work with organizations across the state to improve collaborative practices together. I want to just begin with emphasizing and reiterating why people are so excited about collaboration. We've obviously heard a lot of information about the fact that issues like climate change are large scale and that we have complex and intertwining challenges. We have social inequities, transportation and housing issues, COVID. And so when all of these things are interwoven, it's not just that one type of organization or a group of governments needs to partner together, but it's really cross-sector, and it's financial institutions, it's governments, it's community organizations and grassroots networks working together to collaborate effectively towards shared outcomes. The state has also released a number of different plans as well as policy guidance recently. And one example is the Legislative Analyst's Office Preparing for Rising Seas, which is a report on climate change. The LAO's office actually advises the state legislature on policy and does a lot of analysis and research. And what their report found, as you may be aware of, is that one of the key barriers to local climate adaptation is the lack of forums for collaboration. So because those forums are lacking in local communities, we're less able to adapt to climate change impacts. The governor has also signed just in the last year a number of really important plans. One is the state's water portfolio, which focuses heavily on regional and statewide solutions for managing our water and our future. There's also the USDA Forest Service Shared Stewardship Agreement, which is just signed, and that's between the Forest Service and the state of California, and that focuses on large-scale forest management challenges and partnering with the federal government to do that work more effectively. The state is also rolling out the California Vegetation Treatment Program, which is a large-scale permitting, like an expedited permitting process where we can manage our forests more effectively at a larger scale. So those are just some examples. And here's an example that you're all very familiar with. When it comes to fire preparedness and response, there are many different players involved along the way. And the point here is that every single one of those players has a different culture, whether you're talking about individual residents in their homes, you're talking about fire authorities and folks that are emergency responders. We're talking about insurance companies, local governments, communications and utilities experts. All of these folks, if they're working together effectively, can achieve these shared outcomes listed here on the screen. And just to name a few, if collaboration is happening, we have shared data and coordinated fire prevention and response, collective approach to funding so that we're not competing for funding, but it's compatible with one another, shared equipment and training so we're all competent and prepared for when emergencies occur, coordinated restoration after the fact, after fire occurs, and then protection of things like insurance, as well as making sure that all residents are equitably cared for and protected. There are many other climate examples. Some of these you probably gleaned from Rose's presentation or throughout the morning. Extreme heat, there's great concern across the state that for those with resources, they'll be protected, they'll have air conditioning, while others will die because of the rising temperatures we're going to be faced with. Groundwater storage, there's immense opportunity here where we have potentially enormous groundwater storage capacity. And now we need to be working effectively across the state to not only predict rainstorm events, but be prepared to move water effectively across the region. Sea level rise, in this case, where one project built in one area of the bay could negatively affect another project if not designed correctly or thought through at a regional scale. And things like biotic and human migration, where we need to think about animal and plant communities moving across boundaries, as well as human communities moving across the entire region, country, or beyond internationally. So I love that Angela Nicholson touched on trust networks, that one of the key findings around COVID in Marin County was the fact that the county couldn't have done it alone, that they needed to tap into these trusted networks already built within the community to be effective. And this is really a key finding of ONE-TAM's 4-year partnership study. This was a study done by researchers over 4 years where they literally interviewed dozens and dozens of not just ONE-TAM agency partners, but community members interfacing with the partnership in its first 4 years. And the key finding was that to unlock any other levels of collaboration, things like resource sharing, better communications, you need trust and connectivity to be built. That's the foundation of partnership. But that's much easier said than done. So when I can't find on the internet the image I'm looking for, I draw it myself. And I acknowledge this is a terrible drawing of a cat, but it'll get the job done. This diagram shows us, it begins to introduce the idea of culture and values. And again, we just started to list off a few values around what our purpose is in the current moment. And the important point here is that one, we all come with our own complex layers of culture and values when we interact with our environment. This person here is interacting both with their immediate environment as well as making decisions that affect long-term outcomes. And so when we're thinking about culture and values, another important point is that every individual person, every organization comes with their own set of culture and values that is equally complex. And so as we interact, the key thing when it comes to building trust and connectivity is managing those interactions, because as we interact with those who are different than us, We're going to feel points of tension. We're going to feel things that need to be worked out and differences. And sometimes it'll feel very sensitive and personal because our culture and values is something that we hold very near and dear to ourselves. And so it's really the act of managing those differences in our interactions with others, whether we're an organization or an individual, that really matters. And that gets into the next slide. And this is an opportunity, if you'd like to just pull out a piece of paper, it can be scratch paper, colored or not, and a colored pencil or a marker or a pen or pencil if you have one. And just respond to these questions. And the reason why I'm posing these questions, these are questions shared with County Marin staff. I'm going to move my picture to the other side so I can see better. What life experiences inform who you are today? And similarly, what has shaped your worldview? And see, the thing about values and culture is, values are things that are deeply meaningful and important to us. And culture is really a composite of influences over time. So it doesn't just come from one source or one point. It's not just from our family or a place we grew up. It's compiled over time. And it really is the lens, and it influences how we feel about our environment and how we make decisions. And so many people, because we gather our culture over time, are somewhat unaware of what their culture is made up of, why they make these decisions. And so it's important to start with questions like these and really explore what are these motivating forces for me? Also, equally as important is to point out here that cultures can have supportive or oppressive impacts and outcomes. And I just want to point to recreation culture as an example, because I feel like it's a great example that probably most or all of us can relate to. Whether you are a soccer player, a tennis player, a mountain biker, an equestrian, you love skydiving, you love boating, whatever it is, you probably had the experience that it really helps you to connect deeply to a group of people that share your experience and your interest in that recreation type. At the same time, you can look at another recreation culture. Say you love swimming, you look over at the skate park, which is my favorite place to be, and you look at rollerblading or skateboarding. That world may look totally different than the world you're used to as someone who enjoys the pool for recreation on a daily basis. So culture across the board, no matter what kind of culture you're talking about, is no different. That people can feel very close to one another, they can feel very far apart from one another. And depending on the culture and values, you can have, for instance, outcomes like the left column, which is supportive. These are the outcomes we're going for. Or more oppressive outcomes included in the right column you see on your screen, which are the ones we're trying to get away from that don't help build trust and connectivity. So supportive outcomes, people have the freedom to share values and understand one another and find commonalities. So there's a sense of freedom and openness to share without judgment. People feel valued, respected, and heard. They're motivated because they feel like they belong. And so they share their individual gifts completely and they offer honest perspective. And everyone reaches their full potential. If you look at the oppressive column, you see things like a group's identity is assigned to individuals. So instead of getting to know the complexity of an individual, that person is judged based on a group identity. A dominant culture can seek to exclude, compete, or ignore individuals if they're not a part of that dominant culture, don't fit in. Hierarchical culture can assume that the ideas of one type of person in that hierarchy are good or valid versus others who aren't worth listening to. It can insist that some groups are better than others, or can also insist that some people fit into some roles while others fit into other roles based on their group identity. This is kind of a redrawing of a classic diagram that you've probably seen. So when people say the definition of equity, you're probably familiar with the apple tree, and then you stack different heights of boxes to make sure that if you haven't seen that diagram, you can Google it because I'm sure it'll come up in some of the top searches. So I redrew that, and this is really equity in the context of privilege. And what we have here is someone sitting in a dump truck full of apples with full access to the apple tree. And really no matter how many boxes you stack, it'll be hard to get into the dump truck and participate with that person who has a lot of privilege. And the question that this presentation really points to so far is, what are some of the reasons to ensure that all reach their full potential? So if you benefit from privilege and you're very secure in your own place, why support others to reach their full potential? Why make sure the entire team, the entire community is reaching their full potential? And I would love to hear your ideas about why that's important. I will throw out a few here right now. Starting with Catherine Phillips, who is a researcher and the author of Diversity Makes Us Smarter. Her research around teams found that when she combined people who looked, spoke differently, thought differently into team environments, that the teams compete much more effectively. When you think about, so Jose talked about the history of regional disparities and inequities and social injustices. And when you have generations, you have a team, and some have experienced generations of negative policies and negative impacts that cause them to live much farther away, to travel through harsher conditions or longer commutes, where they can't take care of their family adequately or don't make enough money to take care of themselves or their family. There are people on your team who are not able to contribute their fullest potential to that team, and so the entire team doesn't succeed. When people feel a sense of belonging, they feel more likely to participate and share all of themselves and contribute fully. Also, Jesse Keenan, who's the Harvard professor who has studied climate migration, human climate migration quite a bit, has been in the papers a lot, points out that human systems depend on humans. And so if we're caring for some parts of our society, but we're not caring for other parts, our human systems begin to unravel in the face of human migration and climate disasters, and things really fall apart for all of us. Also, a theme to this presentation has been values, and we can also look back to our values and ask, what are my values around culture and family and community in my neighborhood? And are those values being enacted? So this is where I want to shift and just look at a set of collaborative values as well as culture shift, a model for culture shift. And this is where I want to just briefly introduce collaborative leadership, which seeks to respect the cultures of all while creating an inclusive environment where we can find commonalities and shared actions together across cultures. And I'll introduce a researcher in a second, Amy Mickle, but she essentially says that in her research, collaborative leadership is a set of values and actions that has been found to make or break collaborative efforts. So what are those values? Amy has defined 4 areas of values in her research. She worked with one TAM, she's worked with many different collaboratives. She also teaches at Sacramento State. And the 4 areas she identified were compassion, being empathetic, generous, respectful, having character, being ethical, humble, and positive, courage, being vocal, curious, vulnerable, holding uncertainty, resilient, and also empowering others, commitment, shared vision, taking action, and also believing in collaboration, so believing in your system of values. Now, you may be aware of also some other research authored by Jones and Okun under the title Change Work in 2001, where they studied white middle-class dominant culture. And just to define dominant culture, it's really a strong culture that defines a set of values or expectations on others. And you may feel included in that dominant culture, but if you are not included, you will be at a disadvantage. You will not be provided the resources. You will not succeed in the way you could otherwise. It also speaks to another term you may have heard, which is, I'm forgetting it. I'll bring it up later. But what I want to point out was I want to compare the values on your screen to what Jones and Okun found with white middle class, this dominant culture they defined, which include defensiveness, sense of urgency, perfectionism, quantity over quality, worship of the written word, only one right way, either or thinking, where either it's one thing or the other, but it can't be both, power hoarding and individualism. So you can begin to see this as an illustration of where one group of values or one culture can be more inclusive, while another one is very exclusive and oppressive. So here is a basic model for how to do cultural competence work, how to work across cultures and differences, how to begin to do self-exploration work. And it begins with emotional intelligence and self-awareness. And this is kind of a couple of things. One is emotional intelligence, which is where you're interacting with people and you're aware of your emotions, you're perceiving others' emotions as a way to help you understand that there's either being trust and connectivity built or it's not being built, and you need to take a step back and think about the dynamics going on between you and others. There's also, just like we looked at those questions about personal culture, and it's self-exploration about what are my cultural lenses, what are my values, and what are the implications on others and my expectations. There's the knowledge piece, the second piece down, which is reading and learning about other cultures, people who are different than us. It's actively participating with others who are different than us. So we begin to learn about others and break down personal stereotypes and misunderstandings about the complexity of others who we know and interact with. There's motivation, which is simply the interest or desire to do this work. And I just want to note that for some people, it's not a choice, that if you're trying to survive in an environment of a dominant culture with certain expectations on you for your success, you are having to change yourself just simply to survive in many cases. And then finally, behavior, which is really enacting everything you learn. And so this becomes a cycle or process of learning over time, learning and growing. So having explored a system of values and culture change, here are some beneficial outcomes we can expect. Our communities and policies and systems are more integrated. People are able to give their complete selves, and we're more successful together. Communities and regions align toward common visions that aren't at the expense of a particular group. Grant guidelines and policies are aligned, and they're not competitive or in conflict across the region, and they support all. And I want to leave you asking what your vision is for a more inclusive and integrated region. And as my last screen, I just want to invite you to explore your own personal culture and values and what it means for you when you interact with your environment and with others. And also to look back at that 4-step diagram and think about what you already do to practice some of those steps, what you're learning and how you're employing that learning when you interact with people different than you. And then let us know if you want to participate in a future collaborative leadership training. We're developing one that's going to be rolled out across the state and possibly across the country to help support more robust, more effective collaboration. And I believe Janet McKellar will be sharing something where you can sign up for a future opportunity. And then at the very bottom, my email, kwright@marincounty.org. Feel free to email me to talk more. Thank you.